Okay, Sochi, talk to us about this guy, Brian Hughes. Why does he have so much power in Texas? I've been reading about him. Who gave him this name, Conservative Crusader? What do we need to know about him?
There's one person, and his name is Donald Trump. He is a Donald Trump loyalist. And in fact, everyone might remember after the 2020 election, when Donald Trump claimed fraud in a number of states, he put together a legal team that was sort of an embarrassment. Everyone can remember Giuliani led that legal team. Well, there was one person who was part of it, and under Douglas Brian Hughes. This is the same state senator from Texas that is pushing both the voter suppression bill and claiming fraud there when there is no fraud in Texas, and the anti-abortion bill. And so he claimed in Pennsylvania that there was widespread voter fraud, and a judge found that that was not in fact true. And so it's no surprise that these folks, Abbott and Hughes, are both pushing these bills because they are Trump loyalists and they are worried about the next election.
Matthew, Sue Halpern at The New Yorker writes this about the link between the voting law and the abortion law. Quote, though the two laws address different domains, they are connected. In Texas and elsewhere in the country, a ligature of racism connects efforts to deny people of color their right to vote and women, disproportionately women of color, their right to terminate a pregnancy. And, you know, Matt, sometimes I think when we talk about these things, one, we tend to talk about them in silos, and two, we tend to talk about these individuals as though they sort of appear out of nowhere and are acting solely of their own volition. But they're always organized efforts, moneyed forces behind them. Can you talk to me about what those forces are that are driving both of these efforts forward in the state of Texas?
Sure. And I live here in the state of Texas. I've spent a good bit of time in Brian Hughes's district up in East Texas. I've spent a good bit over the years up there in East Texas. When you boil all these down to, and this is my view of this, when you boil all this down to the Republicans in Texas, and Brian Hughes is the perfect person. In normal years past, he would have guardrails, there'd be guardrails that put around him, and so he couldn't have the power. But our current lieutenant governor, which is a very, very powerful position, has taken all the guardrails off, and he's basically said, let's go as far as we possibly can. And when you look at this, what it's fundamentally about is that the nation has changed in its diversity, and Texas is fundamentally changed in its diversity. But white Christian men like Brian Hughes don't like that change, fundamentally don't like that change. And even though the white Christian men in this country only represent 25% of all the population, they hold 85% of the power positions in politics and in business community. And so what they're doing is they don't want an electorate that looks like the population as a whole. They don't want an electorate in Texas to look like the population as a whole, which is why they're doing this. And they're also doing this on women's right to choose because they don't want women to have the power that they can have in this society. And so as people of color and as women rise on the ladder and gain more and more power and gain more and more rights and establish more and more justice, the pushback is coming from exactly like people like Brian Hughes, who do not like to cede any power that they've held for 200 years.
Reverend Forbes, I got to say, I think Dowd is exactly right there, that this is all about power. What is that going to look like in the lived experience of Texans?
Well, quite frankly, in the lived experience of Texans, particularly women of color, it's crisis. It's going to look like crisis because there's no way that women of color who are marginalized, who are trying to eke out an existence, are going to be able to, if they don't have access to abortion in the state of Texas. So what this actually does is put my sisters, my friends, my people into a state of complete chaos and crisis.